run away yet. One last one at this end of the day. I know we're all looking forward to our drinks. But yeah, there's one more panel discussion. And I think it'll go quite well hand in hand with the previous discussion. I see everyone's walking up very quickly. So this is a continuation of the previous discussion. And our general focus of this whole event has been towards universal and meaningful connectivity. And a lot of this is around our last mile infrastructure, but there seems to be, in some cases, more and more of the hybrid networks and a bit less. So we've got a couple of people who have built infrastructure in various ways throughout the country who will be coming to have a chat with us. So up first is Ed Lawrence. He has built many a network. I think his current role is CEO of Fiber, a dark fiber operator doing interesting work in, well, places that many people seem to not want to build infrastructure at the moment, and other more interesting ones. We also have Jacques de Toy. He has worked for many interesting places, but currently from Vox. I'm sorry. Nigel Fantura, currently with Nokia. And sorry, these bios they gave me are very long, but I'm going to get people to rather introduce themselves than me waffle on about them. And now my page has obviously gotten stuck. And the name has left my mind because I have the attention span of a goat. Oh, gosh. Sorry, my apologies. There. And the last one, Dr. Sunil Pyarlal, who is currently an executive for network architecture at OpenServe. So I think to start, can everyone do a quick introduction of themselves, starting from the far side?
Okay. Yeah, my name is Sunil Pyarlal. I'm, like you said, the executive for network architecture and modeling at OpenServe. And OpenServe's a subsidiary of the telecom group. So I think the rest of me you'll get to know as you ask me questions.
My name is Nigel Fantura. I currently am responsible for business growth at Nokia in the Middle East Africa region. I've been involved in the industry for 36 years. So I've done and seen a lot of things.
Right, I'm Jacques de Toy from Vox, also in the industry 30 years. I think I can share with Nigel, we've seen a lot of changes and we've got the scars to show.
Hi, good evening. My name is Edward Lawrence. I've only been in the industry 24 years, so I feel much younger. And currently the CEO of Fiber. Fiber specializes in building long-haul fiber, dark fiber infrastructure.
Right, so as I mentioned earlier, the topic of today's talk is the integration, the exploring of the integration of hybrid network architectures. So I'm not going to ask anyone specific, so whoever wants to feel up to it first can go. But what would you guys define as a hybrid network architecture, and why is the integration of this important now more so than in the past? Or less so, if you think so.
Okay, I can have a stab at it first, Ed, if you don't mind. So I think if you look at where incumbent operators come from, in the last decade, we spent the decade building networks, building siloed networks. You would have a totally separate network for your enterprise customers. You would have a separate network for your voice customers, and a separate network for your mass market. But what you're seeing now is hybrid networks is not just about combining the technologies, but it's about integrating these technologies. It's about integrating these systems to provide an efficient network, a network that is cost-effective and provide connectivity. And I think just as the previous panel ended, they were talking about meaningful connectivity. And I think you also touched on meaningful connectivity. And if you think about what is meaningful connectivity, I mean, if you look at about 98% of South Africa is connected. It's covered with mobile networks, with fixed networks. And people are connected, but are they online? That is the question. So when you consider being online, a good benchmark is you should have access to at least 2 gigabits of data per day to consider yourself online. To be able to stream, to be able to get onto social media, to be able to get onto LinkedIn. So I think that is where the conversation starts, Ed, and I'd like to kick it off there. What is meaningful connectivity? Can the general person out there, especially in underserved areas, afford to be online, not to be connected, because everyone's connected?
Ed, do you have any thoughts? Other Ed.
Do you have any thoughts? No. I guess it takes many technologies to build the internet, and more technologies arrive over time. There's obviously the rise of the LEO satellite networks and their impact to the internet ecosystem. Yeah, I mean, we've seen some interesting projects in the Eastern Cape who've been delivering fiber to the low-income house, delivering 100 megabits per second per home without any caps. So it's not a usage-based service, It's amazing to see the impact that has, but it certainly takes many different technologies to build and run the internet.
Edward, maybe I can just give a different perspective from a customer's point of view. If a customer contacts the call center, what do they complain about? My Wi-Fi is down. Right? They don't understand the complexities in the background, and I think this hybrid integrated network has become a top priority for any ISP because it needs to be seamless for the customer. He doesn't care if it's the Wi-Fi, if it's the backhaul, if it's the long distance, if it's the last mile. For him, his Wi-Fi is down. Mm-hmm. And I think the way Vox approaches that is to say, top priority from a core perspective, doesn't matter what the integration is about, what technology do we use, but for a customer, it must be seamless, it mustn't be complex.
So you're focusing more on the customer experience as a whole. So
I think we can all talk about the technology, driving the cost down, extending the market. But for me, if you can't satisfy the customer, you don't have a business.
Fair. I mean, from my knowledge of your customers, you guys do a lot of the management right into the customer's house. I mean, my neighbor's one of your customers, and I know he's got a Microtik that I think he said you guys manage. So you guys take that whole last mile right into the end user's house, which is this thing that many ISPs seem to shy away from. Might be slightly off topic, but has that worked well for you guys?
It has. I think it's a necessary evil, because if you don't manage that device, you're in the dark. We sell, strangely enough, the most backup solutions, the most SLAs whenever there's an outage. Right? When there's a cable break, customers scream at you and say, well, what have you done to help me? So we're trying to kind of preempt that discussion by saying, let's manage it. I'll give you an example. During the bad power outage periods we experienced, it was pointless to just have a failover to a wireless network. You actually had to power up that wireless network. So the solution wasn't just, I'll give you fiber and wireless, I'll give you fiber, wireless, backup. And I think that made a relatively big difference. But it comes down to affordability. No? Somebody needs to pick up the tab.
I also think a lot of these deployments has to do with simplicity, right? If we look at the end users today in our networks, in a lot of cases, we're not even talking 5G from a handset capability perspective. So getting end users connected and allowing them to self-drive the device that's connecting, to be able to buy data and all of those, that simplicity is really what's going to be, that's going to drive adoption. Now, from a meaningful perspective, I think if we're talking meaningful, it's about the ability to be able to access anything at the end user's convenience, what they decide. And that's what's driving all of us. The end user determines how we connect, what we want to connect to, and it must almost be the same experience that they had at the office. It must almost be the same experience everywhere that they go. So it's literally up to the ISPs to make that experience as simple, as transparent to back-end whatevers as possible.
Okay, so again, my interpretation from what you've said is almost you want to make it as human interaction-less as possible. Now, for many providers, I feel like that almost means you almost have to be on a prepaid solution for that, because as soon as you're on a postpaid, there's a contract involved. It's almost always a human that has to get involved with that. But the prepaid solutions seem to deal with that a bit more. I mean, Sunil, do you have any insights? OpenServe's been running prepaid for a long time, based on both the mobile network side and
Yeah,
more
so-
recently the fiber side. So
Yeah, so maybe just to draw a little bit of distinction, in the mobile networks actually with Telkom, OpenServe is a wholesale ISP. For example, Jacques, one of our customers, so Jacques resells on our network. But having said that, yes, we have introduced prepaid fiber as well. And I think the model is evolving. I've actually seen a model recently where it's prepaid but postpaid. So in other words, you've got a contract, but you don't have to do any credit vetting because you pay upfront and not at the end of the month. And that is an interesting model. So I think going forward, you'll see a lot of these evolving because, number one, cost is a problem, the cost of connectivity. The other bigger problem is vetting. People have money, especially, we're talking about underserved areas. That is a market that's just under 1 trillion rand a year, cash business. So the guy cannot afford 600 rands at the end of the month, but he can afford 40 rands a day. So he has to buy daily connectivity, or he can afford 5 rand a day. And that is where the model is changing. Is it just prepaid? Because prepaid can cost you 100 rand a week, and the guy doesn't have 100 rand a week. Because his market is, he gets paid today, he's got 5 rands to buy his airtime and get connected. And that's where you're going to see the big evolving. And that's not a small market. That's a market bigger than most corporates in this company. It's a market bigger than most corporates in this country. And I think it was estimated as a cash market of just under 1 trillion rand a year.
yeah, that Kasi market is quite an impressive one. I know there's some people in the audience also who run quite large, I want to call them cash businesses because of that, which becomes a nightmare. One of the topics that was mentioned earlier was the satellite part of the connectivity. I think it was you, Ed, maybe. How are you seeing that fitting into this mixture with more and more fiber being rolled out everywhere? And it seems the fiber is getting cheaper and cheaper. Do you think long-term the satellite has still a major position in these hybrid networks?
Yeah, I think that every technology has its strengths and weaknesses. There's a concept of fiber over satellite was floated at one point, but the idea being that we've seen in Europe and perhaps areas where there's more connectivity, satellite and low Earth orbit satellite networks picking up clients in deep rural areas, but the numbers just if you can get the infrastructure, the base infrastructure costs right. Then I think it finds it very hard to compete. Going back to the Eastern Cape, I saw an advertisement recently for a network that was, if I remember correctly, it was 100 megabits per second. It was prepaid, 60 rand a week. I mean, that's super competitive. How are they doing that? Well, they're doing that because they're encouraging networks to build new long-haul fiber infrastructure, revisiting the whole cost base of the ecosystem. And going back to connectivity costs being too high, no network in South Africa at the moment is willing to sell dark fiber on a long-haul basis. And so, the market is artificially inflated. And I think there's an incredible opportunity to really shake that up a little bit and open that up. If you do an analysis of how much per megabit per second is spent where, a lot of it is in the backhaul. So that's my thoughts.
I mean, on the backhaul topic, Sunil, I think you're probably one of the biggest suppliers for backhaul in the more rural and interesting areas. I mean, for my one network that I assist with, I think you do probably about 80% of the backhaul because you're the only option there, and you've got the historic, very stable network out there. Do you see that network growing more, or do you see it being augmented with other solutions around there, or do you think fiber is the be-all and end-all for at least for your backhaul networks?
So I think there's a whole bunch of technologies you can look at. So let's talk about fiber, right? So OpenServe has quite a bit of fiber. We have just over 180,000 kilometers of fiber. But what does that mean? It means that we have fiber in every municipality. But is fiber all that you can use for backhaul? Not really. We tried using, or a lot of the ISPs tried using geostationary satellites, but the latency there doesn't support the Wi-Fi connectivity that Jacques was talking about. We're starting to see low Earth orbit satellites come around, but the price doesn't support it. We heard people talking about connecting rural areas with LEO, with low Earth orbit satellites, but can the people in the rural areas afford it? It's the big farmers that can afford it, yes, but the community cannot because the bandwidth on satellites is expensive. And then coming back to fiber, yes, I think fiber is just the foundation. And this entire session that iWeek is hosting is talking about hybrid technologies and how you integrate this. Fiber is just the foundation. It can be used for backhaul. The second one you can start looking at is LTE. Then you can start looking at fixed wireless access through other mediums. I mean, there's systems out there that provide connectivity in an unlicensed frequency band, relatively cheap. And then last is your satellite option, because that is expensive. It's got reach throughout Earth. You can have a satellite connection anywhere, but the cost of that bandwidth is expensive. So yes, the fiber is the foundation. It's not all, and we also heard that dark fiber is expensive, because your money comes from value-added services you sell on the fiber. When you light up the fiber, you start making money. So it's a huge investment, and I think going forward in the next 10 years, you're going to start seeing much more disciplined capital expenditure, much more disciplined investment, and starting to augment technologies rather than combining them. How can I use all the technologies in my toolbox to provide connectivity in an underserved area like Mdensane in the Eastern Cape? And it's working. They're connected, but they're not connected with fiber. Fiber is the foundation, but there's a whole lot of technologies that run on top of that connect the communities there.
And I think from an equipment, from a original equipment manufacturer perspective, at Nokia, we're always looking at how do we manufacture equipment that's able to support the behavior of the end user, right? So that we don't have like various flavors of the same thing, but we have a device that one is able to apply in whatever connectivity medium is available at the time, i.e. Is it GSM, is it satellite, is it whatever. So from a Nokia perspective, that's what we look at and do as much automation from a provisioning perspective as possible from a tools in the centralized environment. So for us at Nokia, it's super important that all of our R&D dollars and all of those goes into the environment to ensure that whatever is available from a connectivity perspective, that our devices is able to enable ISPs to have it, to connect the end users, and also to provide potentially backup on one or two of the other technologies. So it's kind of that's kind of the way. And then, as I said, the tools that allows one to enable and to provision the services.
Just want to add to what Sunil said about the discipline around capital deployment. Unfortunately, prepaid brings zero predictability.
Yeah.
We used to customers signing up on debit order, exactly on the 25th of the month, there's X amount coming into the bank. Prepaid doesn't give you that. And I think that's why all the investors are getting a bit jittery to say you're asking for billions to be put into fiber investment on a business model that has not really been proven. Mm-hmm. So I think over time, the investors will get their heads around it, because a prepaid user will buy. He does need connectivity, but he's not necessarily going to buy every month on the 25th. It's just, he will recharge his voucher somewhere in the next 45 days. So that's the one part. I think if I can touch prepaid or bring prepaid and satellite together, we've explored the current research for LEO, the market share for LEO is estimated at around 100,000 in 5 years. Everybody is talking that number. But that's existing proven business cases. If you want to expand the 100 and make it 150 or 200,000, you've got to come up with new markets, new applications. And the one will definitely be to deploy Wi-Fi hotspots in the rural areas. Our challenge is the current LEO providers don't really support that. Because they say, to keep that bird alive, to have a return on my investment, I need X amount of subscribers. If you do a Wi-Fi hotspot deployment, they see it as one subscriber, you collect from 10 or 15. I think it's going to take 2 to 3 years. If they can get their heads around that, we'll definitely be able to speed up deployment of LEO in outlying areas.
Do you not think that the technology that seems to be coming to the market very rapidly at the moment with the direct-to-cell stuff might change that perspective a little bit? I mean, if it's your existing cell phone that can do it, admittedly at a 2 or a 3 gig a day, probably. I mean, like, if I don't need to worry about a cell phone tower, we can just get that straight from a bird. I'm sure there's a business model you can find.
I agree. I think technically it can be done. It boils down to the unit economics. That money is what makes the world go round. If you're not going to get a return in X amount of time, they will just not allow it.
I mean, while those satellite providers have a fixed cost, I mean, there's a lot of the world that those satellites just sit dead over the water because most of the planet is water. But do you not think that just rather getting something from these areas rather than nothing. I mean, Starlink doesn't have a consistent pricing scheme around the world. It's in certain parts of Africa, it's dirt cheap. In parts of Europe, it's stupid expensive. If you own an aeroplane, they seem to try and pull you through the ringer. Do you not think that they take something?
And I must say,
rather
that's
than
what I've
nothing?
got against Starlink's pricing model, is again, you can't enter into an agreement and say this is a 3-year fixed term agreement. So they entered into the aviation space. I followed that very close. It was super cheap. They got a whole lot of users, and the next moment they introduced an aviation plan, and it became super expensive. Now they're talking about different verticals, maritime, different price plan, mining, different. So they look at the market and they say, this mine can afford it, I'm going to charge you 10 times more money. I don't think that's the game to play.
I think the other element there is data sovereignty, right? So the direct to sell. Speaking about regulation, it's a very hard thing to manage if you're allowing all your users connecting directly up to a third party's network without any visibility. I mean, that needs fiber infrastructure to land that traffic. Sure, but yeah, I think there are a few challenges that need to be overcome.
And just back to the mass fiber rollouts that you mentioned earlier, with the investors not putting money forward. I mean, if you look at some of the people saying they're getting hundreds of millions to build this network, I at least from my experience, from my customers' perspective, it seems that the people are very ready to chuck a lot of money into that market already, and it almost feels like it's another gold rush, like we had 10 years ago when everyone was trying to start with all the leafy suburbs. And in some places you had 3 people trying to build over each other and very quickly realized that business model does not work. But like, I've got a customer with a site probably 200 kilometers out of Pretoria. There's 3 fiber providers trying to build the same area, and they're just trying to see who can do it fast. So I don't think there's a capital shortage. And all of these networks are really the prepaid networks. So is there maybe another viewpoint on that from one of the other panelists? Or Jacques, if you have a retort to that.
So yeah, we can talk a little bit about overbuild and about the gold rush you were talking about, or the land grab a few years ago. So remember, like Jacques said, fiber investment is a long-term investment. You start seeing your returns after about 15 years, definitely not before that. And the second point I wanted to make is, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Yeah, so when you start looking at where you roll out fiber and why you roll it out, it boils down to your ARPU, your average revenue per user. And everyone was chasing not just densely populated areas, but your high NLI, your high neighborhood lifestyle index, or previously your LSM models. So 8, 9, and 10 gives you your highest ARPU. You almost get about 80 to 90% connectivity there. Your average connectivity for an FNO around the world is about 30 to 33%. So although open service sitting on about 52%, which is among the highest connectivity in the world, it's still difficult to make money from there, because the less densely populated your area, the fewer people you're going to get onto your network. And you know, the entire conversation in most of today was about the cost of backhaul. So it costs you a lot of money to put that fiber across. And if you don't get a lot of takers on that fiber, whether it is mobile operators using your fiber, whether it is ISPs that lease it and provide wireless ISP type services, or whether it is yourself rolling out fiber to the home. But it is about density. And yes, the previously underserved areas, the townships have the density, but is fiber the right technology? Because you're not going to get the ARPU that you're going to get in your LSM 8, 9, and 10. You're targeting a market of, you know, your LSM 1 to 4 there. So that is where you use fiber as your foundation and start looking at other technologies. LTE is also expensive, but there's lots of other point to multipoint microwave technologies these days that operate in the licensed and unlicensed frequency bands that are relatively cheap. And then Jacques made a very good point earlier on about using satellite as a backhaul medium and providing connectivity. I've seen that in Brazil and I've seen that in Mexico work very, very well. You know, in other third world economies where they're trying to get cheap connectivity. So they use satellite, they bring the connectivity down, provide a fixed wireless Wi-Fi network, very cheap. But in most parts of the world, they're against that because the satellite providers don't want to do that. Their investment of putting the satellite up in the sky then falls apart.
Yeah, so the other, if I can just add something to that, which is interesting. So there's I was pretty close to a company in West Africa that was using Leo as backhaul. So they specialize in building masts for MNOs.
Yeah.
But what they quickly realized is once the mast was successful and they had enough users, then they would push this company out and build fiber out to it.
Absolutely.
And so the model, you're constantly at the fringe fighting for the sort of the edge of the customers and really not making your business case.
Yeah.
I think the one not challenge that is facing ISPs is at what point does ISPs stop playing the traditional role? If you look into Africa, the ISP and the fiber operator is one thing. To make it more affordable, you've got to cut out the ISP, go direct to the market. When will it happen? Where will it happen? At what pace will it happen? I think there's a role for ISPs to play. I do think that specifically the lower LSM, it's a commodity play. The bandwidth is a commodity. So it's going to be determined, the winner will be determined by who's got the right value-added product stack. But you can't continue with just paying or allowing an ISP to put a margin on not really offering a value-added service, especially when it's prepaid.
I think one of the other things that I've also kind of seen in the local context is the lady earlier that was talking about township connectivity. I think we in Nokia, we have this concept called neutral host, which is essentially an aggregator, right? And so what we're seeing is that the task of providing internet into townships is something that I think is typically going to be initiated, implemented, supported, sold within the township, within their structure of rules. And then typically ISPs and aggregators will take on the complexity of aggregating a whole bunch of community ISPs and doing the complex stuff in the back, the billing, the provisioning, all of that kind of stuff. We did a project like this in Cosmo City, and it seemed to have worked really well from an aggregator perspective, just to eliminate the complexities of running a core network. So I think there's definitely a market there for that in terms of townships self-provisioning and self-catering for their internet needs. Absolutely.
Cool. Right. We have not much time left. Is there any questions from the audience for any of the panelists? If you've got a question, I'm using the audience mic right now. Please come up to the front and say who you are clearly, and please keep it concise. Otherwise, I'm standing in the way of everyone's beers and milk after this. So, yeah, moment.
Hi, I'm Clive Fagan from Number Portability Company. One of the things that strikes me, just listening to you, is that there seems to be a sort of ignorance as to what's happening around the rest of the world. Because, for example, in America, suddenly, the T-Mobile guys have got heavily into RAN licensing, and the regulator there is allowing them to have RAN licenses like sweeties in a box. And they've suddenly become the biggest operator in America, which means that from a revenue point of view, they're now federal revenue, which is going into the fiscus, which is playing into the Trump administration's game. Forget the politics. So what I'm seeing is that ultimately the fiber has got to become effectively the pipe. I think you have to start looking at a very different charging model, a volume charging model at the pipe. And how it gets into the pipe is almost irrelevant, because the mobiles and the MVNOs are going to play a major role in that, in terms of coordinating, using 5G at a soft level as opposed to a hard switch level, just to move internet traffic at parallel levels straight into an edge connector, into a hyperscaler data center, and out the other end worldwide. So, and voice traffic, if you look at any analysis, boom. But the MNOs are hanging on to their customers for dear life. As you know, Ecross a little while ago took away win-back. Why are they fighting so hard to keep their customers? Because they're offering data. So I think there's a whole new model evolving, and I think a whole new model of charging that needs to actually come into play.
Any quick responses to that?
I agree 100% with Clive. I can vouch for the voice market. That's falling through the floor right now. The days of charging for minutes, something of the past. I think today there's something like 30 different communication channels available, and you'll make your money on a transaction. You'll be communicating with the customer on Instagram, WhatsApp, etc., whichever channel, and there's going to be a transaction fee for that communication, not for voice minute. Make peace with that. And then I think if you look at the successful operators internationally, they've used the pipe to get into other industries, health industry, IoT industries. But I think we're going to talk about that tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. My name is Brian. My question is based on OpenServe. I think OpenServe has done its studies in the township, and it's known that the economy of the township is 1 trillion. But my concern with OpenServe is that why is OpenServe so slow in terms of deploying? We've got other FNOs that came in and became aggressive. Mm-hmm. And when I was growing up, I know I had a phone line, so that means that existing poles are still, mounted all over. But why is that OpenServe is so slow in deploying in a trillion rand economy, so that we as ISPs that are on the OpenServe network can take advantage and bring more, given that even the systems of the postpaid is there. We call it in the township Kichima Mfana. If I've got 5 rand, I go and pay. If I've got 10 rand, I go and pay, I get connected. If OpenServe can be vigorous, then it will give us an opportunity to put more people.
Sure. So Brian, there's a few things. So firstly, like I mentioned, fiber is a very, very capital intensive investment. And OpenServe is invested, so 25% of our fiber to the home network is actually in townships. So we've been deliberate, we've been very intentional to get into the townships. But to pass and connect a home costs about 7,000 rands. So we spend about 1.5 billion, roughly, on fiber a year. And that doesn't get you many homes. You can connect about 200 to 300,000 homes. And if you look at the number of homes in South Africa, you've got 18 million homes. So we do deliberately target the townships. We do invest in there. But like I said, that's about 25% of the investment. We then also have to target office parks. We've got to target gated complexes. We've got to go where the ISPs want us to go. You're one of the ISPs. You're probably an ISP in the township, so you will know we have presence. But to try and invest 1.5 billion, Ed was talking earlier on about hundreds of millions. Hundreds of millions in the fiber industry doesn't get you very far. So for me to try and look at where do I invest that 1.5 billion that I got, townships is definitely on the radar. There's a lot of investment being made there. The biggest investments in townships is on the backhaul, so that the mobile operators in your townships have decent connectivity, so that they can distribute their network over the fiber. We also try and target fiber to the home, but that's not the only technology we use. In Lufureng, in Lesotho, we're using fixed wireless access. In Dunsane, we've gone very big with fixed wireless access. Mitchell's Plain in Cape Town, we've gone with fixed wireless access. So that is what the conversation we started having earlier on, that it's not just about fiber. It's about how do you bring all of these technologies together? How do you integrate them together to give the customer the price point that he can afford? So it's a totally different price point in the township. It's a totally different model that I'll have to go and deploy there as one that I would deploy in Houghton. So again, coming back to disciplined capital investment, if I don't do that disciplined capital investment, not everybody can afford that connectivity. And I hope that answers your question.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We're out of time. A small thank you from the Zanag at iWeek team for your time on the panel today.